Happy New Year to everyone here from Chucking Darts. The calendar has flipped, which means NBA teams are getting ready for the trade deadline. NBA teams are becoming a little bit more honest about how good they are. And we are starting to figure out who true contenders are. We're going to go to the Western Conference with one of my original Dart loves and talk about how they're moving up and how real they are this year. I speak, of course, of the New Orleans Pelicans. Welcome to Chucking Darts, a podcast of informed, rigorous, reckless, harmless, speculative, and fun predictions about the game we love. You can call me Chuck. This is episode number 191. Episode number 190 technically was my analysis with Esfandiar Baraheni about the OG Anunoby, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickly trade. But it was released a little bit out of order because I am trying to release these episodes in order on YouTube, which, by the way, if you want to look at it, you will get to see every episode first because that's where they go for a couple days before they hit the audio waves. My episodes are, of course, timeless, so their staying power is infinite. So don't worry that if you feel like you miss it on YouTube, you're not going to hear it. You will eventually, but I'm trying to build that audience a little bit. So that's at Chucking Darts on YouTube. You'll find me. But the last audio episode I had was about the Big 12 and this year's draft crop. Talked about with Richard Stamen, who's at Mavs Draft, Jacoby Walter, Kevin McCullough, Emmanuel Miller, Milan Momcilovic. Lots of fun guys in that conference. Please check that episode out. We're back in the NBA. We're talking Pelicans, which means it is my friend Shamit Dua returning to the podcast. Schmidt does a little bit of everything within that organization, but he also operates a Substack called In the No, intheno.substack.com, where he just posted a piece about the trade deadline and what the Pelicans will do therein. We will get to that in due time, but for now, Schmidt, how are you?
Chuck, I'm so glad we finally able to get on the books and get this podcast rolling. I know we've been trying to connect for a while, but I'm glad it's for episode 191, a prime number. So I consider myself lucky.
That was great, man. Thinking on your feet. That's tremendous. Yeah. Yeah. We
I had to
we
Google
are
it.
in our
You said 191. I was like, that sounds like a prime number. Let me check. And I did it.
yeah, we are nothing if not in our prime, you and I. So speaking of being in their prime, boom, segue. The New Orleans Pelicans are 11-4 in their last 15 games. In those 15 games, they lead the entire association of national basketballers in net rating, plus 14.3 per 100 possessions last 15 games. To anyone who would really just look at that very, I guess, general stat, that summarization stat, you would say, well, they must be the story of the league. I mean, if they are that good, better than the Celtics, better than the Wolves, better than the Sixers, better than the Bucks for nearly a full quarter of the season, then surely they must be discussed in contender conversations. Is this team, really a threat to win the West conversations? And yet I feel as though they quite have not really gotten their due. I think there's some reasons why that I want to talk about, but I want you to talk about what you think the source of their success for the last 15 has been.
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think there's a number of different directions you can go with regard to their success. Like obviously, even when you get to your point differentials and your net ratings, and if you're number one or somewhere close to that, a lot of things are going well. Like your defense is going to be good, your offense is going to be good, everything in between is going to be good. So I would say there are three things going particularly well for the Pelicans right now. Number one, they are on a defensive string as a unit, as a team, 1 through 11 ish. I mean, they really run like a 9-10 man rotation. They get to 11 sometimes, some games, but like 1 through 11 ish. There is not a weak link defensively. Even the guys with the worst on court net ratings have the equivalent of a top 10 defense. I mean, right now, like in terms of rotation players, that's Jonas Valanciunas. The Pelicans have an on-court defensive rating of 113 when he is on the court. And that's when you look at, NBA teams, the 10th best team has a defensive rating of 113.
Yeah.
So they're not Right. They're not weak with Jonas out there by any means. It's just the weakest of the crop, right? And their top guys are their top guys. So defense has been excellent for them. And that comes from buy-in from Brandon Ingram and Zion Williams first and foremost. It starts with those two guys. And that is point number two, is those two have been playing very team-oriented ball, and they've been playing at a very high level, and impacting the game on both ends. I think prior to the season, there was, I don't want to call it a hierarchical struggle, but it seemed to come across that way. Like they weren't really sure who's the 1A, who's the 1B. They traded a lot of isolation possessions. The ball didn't really move much. And it seemed to be like a battle of like who could score more. And now it seems like neither of those guys really care if they're hitting 30 points. They just care if they're winning games. So you're seeing their point per game totals come down. You're seeing their usage come down. You're seeing their minutes come down. And it's more of an everybody eats type of offense, right? They're leveraging, and this is going to be my third point, is their shooting. They're leveraging their shooters, particularly CJ McCollum, who is been lights out from deep. They're sharing the ball. They're getting others involved. JV is having a great time. Herb is contributing. Obviously, off the bench, Trey Murphy coming back has been such a big boost for them. All of these guys are playing really well, and that trust level starts from the top, from their best dudes, and that wasn't there as much in the beginning of the season. Now I think there's still like end of game issues they have to sort out. The three, I want to say, yeah, the three of the four losses they do have been in crunch time. And that was early on within this, 11-4 stretch or whatever. But they've been in crunch time. They lost twice to Houston. They got completely stonewalled by Dylan Brooks. They couldn't get a good shot.
The two Grizzlies losses as well.
Sorry, the two Grizzlies losses, one Houston. They lost to Houston early in the season in a similar fashion, so I conflate the two. But yeah, so the two Grizzlies losses, again, end game offensive execution was difficult. I don't know if that's been 100% solved yet, because essentially the rest of their victories have been like by 22 points a game. Like they've just been blowing teams out. So I don't know if they've solved it, but I guess that's one way to solve for crunch time execution, is just never get the crunch time.
Yeah, very well put. Your entire analysis there. I think so. When I've watched the Pelicans this year, I think I watched that Rockets game and both of those Grizzlies games. So when I first reached out to you, it was right around that time about doing an episode, and I was almost relieved that we couldn't line it up schedule wise that week, because I was like, man, my nerves are kind of raw. If my nerves are raw, I bet his nerves are very raw. I don't know if that's the energy we necessarily want to be bringing to the pod. Maybe that's how a lot of people like to create their content. Hate that word, but it's not how I like to do mine. I like nice, positive vibes, things to build on, things to notice, and things that are enduring. And what is so encouraging about this stretch to me is that even though the end of game stuff is to be determined, this is still Zion Williamson's second season where it looks like he has a chance to basically play the majority of his games. I mean, this is his fifth year, correct? And rookie year, he didn't debut until halfway through. Second year was, bubble year, but that was the year that he was an all-star, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, the rookie year was the bubble year. Second year was still a COVID year.
There you
go. Fanless year. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the last 2 years have been sort of stop and starts with, his ailments. And I think what I believe to be enduring, why I think this stretch is not just a convenient time to record, but also a harbinger of things to come, is that Zion is settling into the kind of player that he is going to be throughout his prime. That's not to say that he's reached his zenith or anything like that, but what narrative there was about Zion early in the season, which I was, rolling my eyes at just because I found it kind of exhausting was just like, well, he doesn't look like how he looked at Duke. At Duke, he was this, levitating athlete, and they would show the clip of him blocking DeAndre Hunter, that famous block that he had against Virginia in the corner, and they're like, he's just not the same guy. And yes, he's not the same guy. Yes, like every single power athlete ever in the history of time, he has added weight from the time that he's 19 to the time that he's 23. But there was never really any doubt that he was still an extremely effective scorer. It's not as though his scoring efficiency took some major dip at any point this year. There was a question about him and Ingram, which they're still sorting out. But what I see from Zion now, from what I've watched during this stretch, is that though the offense is still revolving very much around his touches, it is not revolving very much around sort of his, I guess, I don't even want to call it ball stopping, but he's not operating like a heliocentric player. He's operating like a player who wants to get touches in advantageous spots, but has no issue at all in sort of you called it everybody eats. Other people might call it a 0.5 offense where it's like touch decision, touch decision, touch decision. Like, let's move on. In this game against the Warriors, where they absolutely wiped the floor with a less than full strength Warriors team, but still, I mean, the game was over in 5 minutes. Um, you would see Zion in the short roll with CJ McCollum, got it, instant kick out to the corner. Herb Jones hit a three, and all the Pelicans shot well in that game. Is probably an outlier in that respect, but still. You would see Trey Murphy set a pin down for him so that he would get the ball, with some space to operate, enough to paralyze the defense, make them collapse. He kicked it back out to Trey. Trey pump faked. That pump fake will work every time when you're Trey Murphy. He got inside, and it was a dish to another very open three. It's just very, very simple things like that. Getting Zion a post touch, and then I think Najee was in the corner. He exited out so Zion could go to work. Quick spin. Zion in the post is very comfortable. Didn't make the shot, but easy offensive rebound and put back, which is all part of the Zion package. When stuff is that quick and that easy for him, that's when the Pelicans, to me, look incredible. And it looks as though, yeah, what are you supposed to do with this team? What decisions are you supposed to make in terms of like picking your poison? So, do you feel as though this sort of Zion diet is the guy he is going to be? Or do you think, as let's say Pelicans make the playoffs, fingers crossed, of course, do you think that they will sort of revert to like a bit of your turn, my turn, or sort of helio ball as the stakes kind of rise?
Yeah, I think, good questions. First of all, on media day before the season started, Billy Green had a quote where he said last year he felt like they did a good job of having a defensive foundation that, despite guys missing time, constantly changing lineups, they were able to play the same way and be effective throughout the course of the season. They finished sixth best on the defensive end last season, and what he said is absolutely true. Everyone you could think of missed time, and yet they were good defensively throughout. He said what he didn't do a good job of was building an offensive system that operated the same way. And what he was getting at is it was too heliocentric when Zion was available. It was too heliocentric when BI was available. And then when you walked away from those two guys, when those two guys missed time, then the team was kind of left trying to pick up the pieces and didn't really have a good game plan. So I think obviously there's going to be a certain level of, hey, you're going to miss two really, really good scorers. Your offense is going to flounder regardless. But the concept of we're going to move away from these guys just pounding the ball, so to speak, and trying to make every single play into more of this, egalitarian style offense. It's something they brought James Borrego in for as well. And I think Zion and BI struggled with it a lot in the beginning of the season. They had to have a team meeting after Zion made comments of like, I'm just trying to buy you, and
Yep.
I think everyone kind of understood that was code for I want the ball in my hands more. you know, um, regardless of however Zion tried to backtrack those comments, I think everyone understood where those frustrations were coming from.
It's a
And
pretty media
so,
savvy way of saying it, by the way, saying I'm just trying to buy in. Like you can set, as we've seen with some of the reporting about Golden State, you can set off a bomb if you want to set off a bomb and really sow dissension. So it's to his credit that he like go ahead though. Just wanted to mention.
yeah, no, for sure. And so, since the faded team meeting, the Pelicans have been, I believe, like 18-8 or something like that, but just a very, very, very good team, crushing in the net ratings, crushing in all those statistical measures of a good team. And part of it has been, like we've talked about, there has been buy-in. As far as Zion settling into, is this the kind of version of Zion? I don't know. I struggle with that because it's still so early into his playing career right now. Um, we haven't seen him in a playoff setting. We haven't seen him game plan to that level. Obviously, coaches game plan for him pretty heavily. The defenses
Mhm.
are tilted towards keeping him out of the paint. So, like, I am curious to a certain extent, like how much different playoff defenses are actually going to be compared to what he's seen against some of these opponents. I think they're going to be. I suspect they're going to be quite similar. There's not much else you can do except for, hey, let me put my big on Herb Jones and plant him in the paint, put a point of attack defender on Zion. Like, yes, maybe there's like specific niche player tendencies and other player tendencies that are not Zion related that you can key in on, like really fine tune that stuff. But like the broad strokes of it, I feel like the playoff defenses are going to be pretty similar to what he's seen against like the teams like the Bucks or even the Lakers and Memphis at times. And so that's going to be something interesting to watch. But I find it difficult to assess Zion and like the rest of his career because he's hardly played. So I do think him being like a what do you call it? Like Play-Doh and molding him into like whatever
Mhm.
you need to mold him
Mhm.
into offensively is the higher ceiling version, right? I think there's a really high floor if you just give him the ball, get out of the way, let him do him. Like he can bring you to a decent winning record. There's probably a cap on that type of heliocentrism and centrism that we've seen maybe with like Luca, we've seen it with Harden, we've seen it
Mhm.
with various players. Uh, Zion as a mobile wrecking machine, as a screener, as a cutter, as a handoff guy, transition guy, or now, okay, we are going to put him on ball in the pick and roll. Like that raises the ceiling and makes it so you kind of have to account for everybody on the court. I think to your point, like I don't know if he's settling into that. I think they're just kind of scratching the surface of that, to be honest. Because I think there are levels that are going to be unlocked we haven't seen yet that are entirely player and personnel dependent. So, for example, he has never played with a extremely elite pick and roll operator,
Okay.
and so
Okay.
like
Sure.
I'm just throwing a name out there, like if he had someone like Trey Young to screen for, like I think that looks different, right? If he had like a James Harden or a Dame Lillard, I think that looks a little bit different in terms of like what he can be.
Mhm.
Conceptually, some of those moments are there. You see it a little bit when he sets screens for BI, you see it a little bit when he sets screens for CJ, but then there's the whole like, hey, there's actually a different offensive engine, and Zion being a complementary piece of the offensive engine. Like we have not seen that, right? Um, we haven't really truly seen him in space. Like there's been moments. There just hasn't been a full on commitment to we are putting the most amount of shooters around him as possible.
Well, and that
Um,
lineup would be CJ, Hawkins, Trey, Zion, Ingram, I would think, right? I mean, if you're thinking of a five-man unit that would maximize the space, am I missing anyone? Did anyone need to be replaced there?
Sorry, my headphones died, so I gotta turn up the
Okay,
volume
that's all right.
on the speakers a little bit. I don't know if you're getting any feedback, let me know.
It's all right.
But
You got me?
yeah, I got you.
Okay. So if you were to maximize space around Zion to truly see what he was like with as much shooting as possible, that lineup would be CJ, Trey, Ingram, Zion, Hawkins. Is that correct? You think?
Yeah,
Or
yeah, that'd be a pretty filthy lineup, and
yeah.
they have played that lineup precisely 0 minutes so
Well,
far.
and here's but and I know that you and I are both, you know, astronomically high on Mr. Murphy, always have been. You and I are both, I think very encouraged by Hawkins and think that his early season flashes showed that I don't really know what they did sending him to the G League. I didn't really think there was much point to that. They needed to play him, and now they are, which is good. But that lineup, when you think about that lineup, I mean, there really is no, and this is one of the things I think we've also I am comfortable saying this about Zion, though maybe he can still surprise me. I don't consider him a small five. And I don't think that the Pelicans should really consider him a small five because number one, his defensive instincts have not really ever popped in the pros for one reason or another. Number two, it's a lot to ask someone to bear a huge offensive usage burden and then play out of position on defense at what will likely be the most important position in a given defensive lineup, number two. So you don't want to put, too much on him. And uh number three, like I I worry still about Zion's durability, and I don't want him to get beat up. And so I would think if they're trying to save him that possibility, you wouldn't really want to mess around with him with small five much either. Now, who like this team could look different post trade deadline. It could look different next season, and you could have a more naturally spaced unit, which I would certainly look forward to. But when I talk about Zion in this sort of what you called mobile wrecking ball, this 0.5 role where he is maybe not starting on the ball very much, but he's in some sort of screening action, either off the ball to get him going or working as a screener in a more traditional pick and roll. I think that that tends to save his body a little bit as well. I mean, like, as special as Giannis is, and he has a ring to show for it, like, that is a brutal brand of ball to go into the wall over and over and over and over again when the stakes are high. And like, maybe it seems like I'm getting ahead of myself by saying the Pelicans are gonna, be in a big playoff series this year, but I like because I have been so in on their draft picks for so long, like this is how it's supposed to work. You draft well, and as long as the team is healthy and there's some cohesion and there is buy-in from everyone involved, like eventually within a couple years, you start to beat teams that haven't drafted as well as you have and haven't kept their teams together as well as you have. And so while I think this stretch is a pleasant surprise about how successful the Pelicans have been, I don't think it's ridiculous to say that they could match up well, for example, with the Thunder in a playoff series. I think that'd be great. I don't know who I'd favor, but I think that the Pelicans have certain advantages in that series. The same, and they'd have advantages against the Lakers. They'd have certainly advantages against the Kings or the Warriors. So all of this stuff is coming. And I think if there is a version of Zion that will most likely stay healthy, still provide that sort of elite both gravity and productivity and scoring efficiency. It's one where he doesn't have to be the guy over and over. Ingram doesn't have to feel like he's the guy over and over at end of games, though I think they'll need him to be some version of that, some sort of their own DeRozan. Like in certain matchups, they'll need his ability to score inside the arc. And CJ, who has never really been that guy at an all NBA level, he doesn't have to pretend like he has to take 25 shots for them to have a shot either. It's just this sort of new conception of a big three that I think is actually going to become more in vogue across the league as efficiency becomes so important that hierarchy will matter less and fit will just matter more. And that's what the Pelicans have been so interesting in regards to ever since, that 2021 draft where they got Herb, Alvarado, and Trey to sort of surround this core, is how is this fit really going to work? They've been called a sleeping giant in the Western Conference by many people, and it seemed sort of like not only were they a sleeping giant, but they would, hit their own snooze button because they were fighting themselves looking for the right fit. And what really excites me, obviously, is the prospect that they found that. And I wanted to kick to you sort of what you think of their rotation breakdown now. Because now Hawkins is playing, Larry Nance is back, Najee Marshall is playing. Like, do you think they have settled? I know they're still working kinks out, but do you think they've settled in now to a rotation that whose minutes are relatively stable, that they're sort of past the experimentation phase of who to play where and when and with who? And if they're not past that phase, what do they have left to figure out?
No, I don't think they're past that phase yet. So I think there's a couple things going on. One, Trey Murphy is still on a minutes restriction. And so until he's off of that minutes restriction, it's going to not be as I guess consolidated as it can be or as aggressive as it can be featuring shooters or featuring Trey basically, right? So it's a lot different when he's limited to 25 minutes to versus when he can get up to 38 if you really need him to, right? Big difference there. The second thing is I'm not totally convinced Hawkins is in the rotation here to stay. Like, Jose Alvarado had to miss a couple games with illness. I believe he was active the last game and was a healthy DMP. I just don't know if that was, hey, we're just going to buy you one more game of rest type of deal or what it was. I just can't imagine he's been excised from the rotation just yet. And so if Jose Alvarado's playing, Hawkins is probably not going to get a lot of minutes. In my opinion, I think they have a solid top 7. So that's their starters. That's Trey Murphy, who should be a starter, but it's Trey Murphy and Larry Nance, right? That's their top 7. They have a solid top 7. My 8th guy would be Dyson Daniels because I think he has elite scalable skills that translate in the playoffs, namely just his absurd defense, particularly in the West, where you have SGA, Luka, Fox, Booker. Ja is not going to be in the playoffs, but those type of players, Dyson is an credible asset for, and has done his job admirably playing that kind of role. So I think he's gonna, that is going to be there against good teams. I think Hawkins' shooting is an elite, scalable playoff skill to where they should actively seek to get him minutes and game reps and opportunities so they feel comfortable playing him in the playoffs because his ability to get hot can really transform a game in a way that very, very few players can. But I don't think they haven't fully committed to that yet. I do know that there are people in the front office that would like to clear some minutes for those guys.
Sure.
So, it's going to be something to watch at the deadline for sure. If they're able to pull that off. I personally don't think Jose and Najee are players I would like to rely on in the playoff setting. I think they're volatile and high energy players to where when they're on and forcing turnovers, like they can transform a game. But when they're not forcing turnovers, they can be liabilities on both ends, frankly. Just being out of position or in Jose's case, being too small. So I think the prime example of that was the previous time that the Pelicans were in the playoffs. Jose was matched up against CP3, had a ton of high energy moments that got the crowd rocking. But then you look at the box score, Chris Paul didn't miss a shot. And you look at the series, on off data, and the Pelicans were like something like minus 16 or minus 18 in the Jose Alvarado minutes per 100 possessions every single game. So it was just like, Yeah, like he's a energy player. Is it translating to anything of importance on the court? I don't know. I don't trust that in a high leverage setting. So I think they have 7. They probably have 8 in Dyson. It just you just have to mix them in there with the right group of shooters, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Just the right group in general. And I would like to see 9 in Hawkins, but that's it's either going to be Hawkins or something's going to happen at the deadline where they acquire a guy that they trust. But
Yeah, let's talk about that. And let's talk about your piece. What was the focus of your piece? What do you think, like, name some names that you think they could be interested in, that they could be in on, and that they would have the assets to acquire without messing with anything, again, as good as they are, not messing with their core.
yeah, so the primary focus of the piece revolves around the big man position. Um, Jonas Valanciunas has been amazing.
He's been real good,
Just
really
amazing.
good.
He's their most reliable player. He's their most steady player. He never misses a game. You can count on him to absorb as much offensive usage as he needs to for that particular game, right? He could have a game where he takes 6 shots and score 12 points, or he can have a game where takes 12 shots and scores 25 points, right? Like whatever
And
you need him to do.
he's shooting threes, baby. He's
Yeah,
launching.
right.
Yeah.
Obviously a monster on the boards. Just been a really solid guy. However, it's no secret that the coaching staff doesn't trust him at the end of game in defensive situations. He is 31 years old and on an expiring contract. So there is a limited time frame where I think he can keep playing at an effective level.
Mm-hmm.
Versus a limited time frame the Pelicans have to maybe get anything of value for him or to be able to use him in a trade to go get someone that fits more of what they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it comes down to more of a cap decision rather than a player decision, because as a player, he's just been amazing, right? It's just one of the situations. Can you bring in someone that is under contract for the next 3, maybe 4 years, a little bit younger, a little bit more mobile, that the coaches trust defensively and that they trust defensively enough to start a guy like Trey Murphy, to play Hawkins more minutes than they have been playing, that kind of situation. So it's like, maybe you subtract a little bit of JV-ness and you replace it with more Trey Murphy, more Hawkins, that kind of stuff. And does that change the outlook of your team? And so you ask for names. I think there's 3 names in particular they'd be interested in. I think the first name, at the rate they've been playing, I don't think he's going to be available at the deadline, but I do think he's going to be available probably by the summer, because they also have a financial decision to make, is Jarrett Allen.
Okay.
Cleveland, I think the secret with them is they're better as a single big team.
Yeah.
And you're kind of seeing that with how well they're playing with Jarrett Allen right now. Evan Mobley is also a very, very, very good player and worth investing in. He was part of Trey Murphy's draft class, so he's up for a big extension this summer. Obviously that would kick in the following year, but he could secure that extension this summer. And so they got the Donovan Mitchell thing looming over them. And if Mitchell accepts what would be a supermax contract, that would be something similar to what Jaylen Brown got, the $300-ish million. They are in a very, very tight financial position, because there's Garland is also already on a max, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have to think long term, and I think it is just a waiting game before Jarrett Allen's available. It's just, do they have the desire to move off of him in this February? That's what it comes down to, because I do think there are pieces on the Pelicans that they would love. I think JB would be a part of that deal, and I think he'd be a good stopgap for the rest of the season. There's familiarity with JB Bickerstaff. And I think if you want to ease Mobley into a full-time center, like, there's probably not a better guy than JV to like facilitate that process. Because you could, if you really truly wanted, you could bring him off the bench, and JB would be, I mean, I'm sure, like, he's got pride and he wouldn't love that,
Yeah.
but like,
if you extend him and pay him,
yeah. And so, and he's a good player. You could rely on it. But I think they would really like a Herb Jones. I think they would really like a Dyson Daniels. One
of
of
course
those
they
two.
would. Yeah. Oh yeah. You're talking about, I mean, that is a pretty penny for Jarrett Allen in my opinion. Like, I like Jarrett. I've had a soft spot for Jarrett for a very long time, but I do think there's a question where if you bring him in, one of the things you say, sacrificing the Jay Venus, there's two dimensions to Valanciunas' game that I won 2.5 that I think do translate to the playoffs and are very important for where the Pels want to go. Number one is just his brute strength. And it is true that he can be a defensive liability at the end of games, but there are, you need to have power players to, if nothing else, match up with the power players that you're going to play. And so while he may not, again, close out games, could JV give you minutes against Jokic where Jokic isn't just carving up your defense like Swiss cheese because there's nothing anyone can do with him? Maybe. I think he is capable of good minutes in a really tough matchup against a really good player. Number two is the fact that he has embraced shooting threes and he's embraced sort of at least the illusion or giving the Pels the illusion of playing 5-out offense is one of the reasons they've been able to settle in on this more egalitarian style where they can move Zion around the paint as more of a chess piece while JV is at the top of the key, swinging it, going into quick dribble handoffs, that sort of thing. And finding that offensive chemistry is very, very difficult. I think that Jarrett Allen is an intelligent offensive player, but he's not no one would ever even think to guard him, and he's not going to take those threes. And I don't think he'd take those threes in the playoffs. And so I think you would risk cramping that up a little bit. And to me, that's the most important thing that the Pels can focus on right now is maintaining this sort of offensive identity that they have found. I would not really want to jeopardize that because I think offensive identity, for better or worse, is just so important in the playoffs. If you're fighting who you are and how you want to score in the playoffs, then you're on borrowed time, in my opinion. And then the other part of it is just Valanciunas can rebound with anyone in the league. Absolutely can do that. And that is also very important in the playoffs. I like Jared. Jared's not a terrible rebounder, but you saw what happened when he went up against a power rebounder in Mitch Robinson last playoffs, which is why Jarrett Allen might be available, why we're discussing him. So I would just suffice to say that I think attaching Herb or Dyson to get Allen, I think is a very risky move in my opinion. But I interrupted you. I'm sorry. You can feel free to disagree or add context to that or move on to your other two names. Go ahead.
I think you raised super important points, and that's kind of the dance the team is going to have to do, right? They're going to have to figure out, if they keep rolling teams like they have been all the way to the deadline, is it even worth changing things like that? And B, you're right, there is an element of that spacing that you're going to have to refigure out. I think there's optimism on my part that if they were to get Allen, that Trey Murphy would move into the starting lineup. So maybe you're not, guarding Allen out by the 3-point line, but it's a net shooting positive with Trey and CJ out there. Their skills are additive in a way that, right now teams actively, a lot of teams, they will put their center on Herb Jones.
Sure.
And or if they don't put their center, they'll put a big wing on him that will just be in a continual help position, and they'll be like, we will live with Herb taking threes. And to Herb's credit, the recent stretch of games, last 4 or 5 or so, he's been shooting the cover off the ball.
A willing shooter, yeah.
But prior to that, he had a stretch of 10 games or so where he just couldn't buy a bucket. So it's just I think the Pelicans have to untangle their success from from if Herb is making threes or not, which right now there's a pretty strong correlation between if his shot's going in, there's a strong positive correlation of they're winning games. B, there's a negative correlation with if his attempts are getting up there. Because if he's taking a lot of them, that means they're leaving him open, and BI and Zion and CJ and JV, those guys are unable to get to their spots. Because if you think about it, if Zion's going to get to the rim, he's going to get to the rim. He's going to opt to do that instead of kick it out to Herb, right? BI, if he can get to his spot, he's going to opt to get to his spot before kicking it out to Herb. But if they're struggling and they see, okay, well, there's that defender and Herb's open. The right basketball plays to pass it to Herb every single time. Those attempts go up. And so the Pelicans, I think heading into last night were 500 when he takes more than 3 threes, and they were 13-3 if he took fewer than 3 threes. So I think that's like a pretty strong thing there. And I think, like, obviously there's no defense in the world if you put Trey Murphy out there that they're going to put Rudy Gobert on Trey Murphy and live with the shots going up. Like, they're not going to.
I mean, they can live with it. They'll just die quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
If they were to
do
something like that. Yeah.
So I think there's optimism on my part. They get Allen, they start Trey Murphy, and offense looks different in that regard. And the vertical spacing Allen provides is an element that they haven't had. And I think that, with a big downhill threat like Zion and even BI, who's a skilled tall passer, they can unlock some more creative spacing than what they got currently. So I think, like, the element of missing JV's shooting, he's more of a guy that he hits them rather than they guard him, right? Like, it's not, he's not like creating space for you in that regard. But man, the way you speak about the power players is absolutely true, right? Like, you can look at every matchup JV has had against Minnesota and their front line, and he's punked both of those guys like every single time, right? With Jokic, it's a little tougher. I think they had a matchup earlier in the season. Jokic just kind of deep fried him, and like they try to put JV like they put Larry on him. Obviously, Larry can't do anything against Jokic, and then they check JV back in at the end of the game, and promptly like Jokic like put 2 fouls on him and fouled him out the game. But the next matchup, the one that Pelicans won, the way they attacked Jokic was on the offensive end. Right. And JV is a guy that can force Jokic to defend you. Like, he has to work, right? Like, you gotta like really, really fight if you're defending JV. And so that's an element you would miss. And I'm curious, with Jarrett Allen admitting the lights were too bright for him in the playoffs, if that's just like a one-off thing, or if that's a continual thing. Like, like historically, like in the regular season, he's been fine against those type of matchups. And he's matched up well enough with guys like Jokic and whatnot. Like, I think he's been himself. But like, man, that playoff outing was just terrible. So it's just like, I think there's something to figure out, like, what actually happened there, right? That's for the guys who make the big bucks to figure out what happened there. But my bet would be, if you're going for that guy, it's a bet on rim protection. You're improving your elite defense to, I think, an even more elite defense. You're getting a guy who can close games for you, because right now they close games with Larry Nance, and that's not always the best matchup. I'd agree. I think I would rather close with Jarrett Allen against Anthony Davis than Larry Nance, right? Like, that would be my preference. And then, I think that the Jarrett Allen theoretically allows Hawkins to get minutes, theoretically allows Trey to start, and that kind of stuff. So I think that's where my head is at. Remains to be seen. Moving on away from Allen, the other guy they would be interested in is Wendell Carter Jr., who is again not JV. Right, like none of these guys that they would be going to get, because no one, there's very few JVs out there, right? There's very few I can eat you for breakfast type players. The other thing with Wendell Carter is he is as injury prone as the Pelicans have already on their roster with Zion or even Larry Nance. And he's played 62 games once in his career. He's missed the majority of games this season already. And it's just like, at this point, I'm a little confused if he's a player who actually impacts winning, even when he's healthy. I think he's got all the, like, if you squint, you're like, oh, this guy's got everything, right? He can score from kind of like all over the court if he wants to. He's got a sneaky 3-ball, and sometimes it's not anything to like, be like, oh my God, this guy's a shooter. But like, you'll have nights like JV where, he can knock some down. A decent rebounder, decently mobile, right? I would hate personally to move off of JV to go get Wendell Carter. Now, if you move off Larry Nance and got Wendell Carter, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense.
That's exactly right. If you're getting Wendell, I would hold Valanciunas and like have him replace Nance's minutes. Now, whether how you structure that deal, I don't know. But Wendell's another guy who is not he, he has starting center size, but he doesn't match up physically with, if you want to go far, he can't be playing 30 minutes a night. It's not going to happen. And even in pick and roll defense, guards are not really afraid of him. Valanciunas at least can have some deterrent effect just by being enormous, even if, the very best in the highest stakes will chew him up. Like I agree that would be he could be a rotation piece, but I would not make him the prize.
Yeah, I would love to have him as okay, you're splitting the center minutes with those two guys. There's probably some matchups where you could play JV and Wendell Carter at the same time. I mean, there's probably not a functional spacing difference between Zion and JV out there, Wendell Carter and JV out there. So like, you could go uber big if you really wanted to. But I think it's more of those like the Pelicans really prize their switching defense with Larry Nance out there.
Yeah.
And what they would want out of Carter is the ability to go switch 1 through 5.
Switch 1 through 5, right.
And so it would be less of a, hey, he's going to be a drop big and try to erase shots like Jarrett Allen. It'd be more of a, we're just going to like blitz every pick and roll. We're going to, play extremely aggressive defense. We're going to use our size at the wing positions to just blow stuff up, like that kind of defense. So interesting guy theory. The contract is amazing. Like it's 13 million, goes down to 11, goes down to 10. It's a declining contract. Like it's gonna be under the mid-level exception for the foreseeable future. So I think it's one of those things where they should try to keep JV if they're gonna go get that guy, right? Yeah. The last thing I want is an injury-prone Larry Nance and an injury-prone Wendell Carter as my center rotation. And because if Wendell Carter's out, then what?
Yeah.
Then what? That's never a question with JV, right? You're just like JV's just never gonna miss a game. So
who's guy number 3?
Guy number 3 is Onyeka.
Oh, I had him in my mind. I was like, it'd be really cool if they were to get Onyeka. That would cost a pretty penny, because I think for as much as Atlanta is in flux, I think they do value him and they want to clear Capella out so he can start. But talk to me about Onyeka and what you think the Pels would have to give up to get him.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a counter to like what you just said. I think there's a sense around from the people I've talked to that like Onyeka may be more available than what people think. And part of that is like he's already locked into a contract, so people lose the ability to kind of give him the contract they want to give him. And I think believers of Onyeka would just see that as a positive. Like, yeah, I got this guy locked under a pretty solid deal, but that's just how certain executives are viewing that situation. But I think Onyeka is, again, I think he's closer to Wendell than he is to Jarrett, but like you're kind of seeing like a Goldilocks spectrum. Like, there's Jarrett Allen,
sure.
there's Wendell, and then there's kind of like Onyeka in the middle.
Yeah, Onyeka guarded Giannis as a rookie in the playoffs when he was on the Hawks and the Hawks played the Bucks in that conference finals, and he held up in his limited minutes. No, I'm in on him. What does that trade look like to you?
So it's interesting because the Hawks have an enormous trade exception they generated from the John Collins trade, so they can take on a lot of salary in that regard. Obviously, like they have to mind their situation relative to the tax. And Onyeka has a poison pill, which is his outgoing money counts for his new money, and then his incoming money counts for his current money, and or vice versa. I'm not explaining it properly, but essentially you have to match. It's tricky to match salaries, but the Pelicans are able to do it, A, with the Larry Nance contract, B, because Atlanta has the big trade exceptions. It's actually a lot easier to finagle those kind of salary matching situations. So there's really not an obstacle from there. I again would love to supplement JV rather than replace him. Mm-hmm. But if you're a believer of Onyeka, that's a guy again, he can switch a little, he can rebound a little, he can rim protect a little, he can kind of do a little bit of everything. rumor has it that he can step out and shoot. Atlanta just doesn't have him do it that much. I will believe it. Well, like, here's how I feel about shooting bigs: is no one guards you unless you're KP or Towns. So like, or you were Dirk, right? So like, I think an average NBA team will live with one of the bigs shooting, especially if the alternative is a Zion Williamson layup, right? Like, what are we giving up here? We're going to cheat off the big. That's what we'll do, right? Well, you want to hit threes? All right. That's kind of the math game that'll go on every single game. But, he's an interesting theory guy. I'm just a little bit scared of, like, the physicality factor, because, like, even when he matched up against Jarrett Allen, like, Jarrett Allen just made him look small. Like, Jarrett Allen just, like, was kind of pushing him around, grabbing offensive rebounds. So he can do a lot of things, a lot of value as if you're playing a more aggressive style of defense, but, like, how is he going to hold up against Jokic? How is he going to hold up against AD?
Oh, well, no, I mean, not well, but you're not going to find that guy just on the trade market. The way to beat those guys, to the extent that you beat them, is to stretch them out as much as possible so that your offense can just sort of out execute their offense and try to make defensive gains elsewhere on the court than, in one-on-one matchups. But I would, if I'm Atlanta and, someone calls me about, like New Orleans calls me about Onyeka, I would ask for Trey Murphy first. You'd say no. And then after that, I would say, well, what's worth my while on your roster? I would think that the discussion, I mean, you could talk about Dyson. If they're doing a full teardown and they really believe in Dyson, then they could, but they're not going to trade Jalen Johnson, right? Because they love Jalen Johnson. Understandably so. So if Jalen's going to be there, I almost think that you would have to focus on Herb and or Hawkins, just because Jalen's not an incredible, off the dribble or catch and shoot 3-point shooter. He's more of a, all around playmaking wing. So you'd want to optimize the space around him. If you're holding Trey with him, obviously, then you would want to have Herb's defensive chops. But if not, and you really want to maximize the spacing, it would be Hawkins. It's interesting. I think it gets closer. I don't remember where the Pelicans war chest of picks stands, but I think you'd have to dip into that. But yeah, I think
it's a big war chest still.
Yeah. But that's an interesting target, man. If you were to especially if you were to get him, hold JV, and replace Nance's minutes functionally with Onyeka. Onyeka, I'm among his believers. I know that he's only like 6'9", and that's why I don't think he's ever going to be a 30 a minute a night guy on a contender. I don't think that's his fate, but he is a power player. He plays with a lot of strength, in my opinion, and I think that he, in an offensive system that is a little bit more creative than, Trey Helio ball, I think that he can pass out of his position pretty well. I think that he can switch on defense, especially on a smaller guys, pretty well. And if you're looking for 15 playoff minutes a night, I would like him a lot. So Goldilocks is exactly right. You have piqued my interest with Onyeka.
Yeah. He's super interesting. I'm a little like you mentioned the Trey Young thing. I think that's the most intriguing part, right? So I think, like, there's an element of, like, hey, John Collins has never really looked the same since he left Trey Young, because Trey Young spoon feeds his big baskets. Like, he is able to create lob after lob after lob, just easy looks at the rim. So there's a little bit of, like, oh, I don't know if the Pels have that. What's he going to look like in the situation? But then there's also the flip side of it. It's like, okay, well, Onyeka has been in a pretty muted role relative to what he was projected coming in. Like, there was like a little bit of like, oh, this is like Evan Mobley, like, beta test version, like, right? Like, he can do a little bit of all those things that Mobley is actually, like, very good at, not quite as good though, like, so it was just like, so has he gotten a chance to explore any of those skills in Atlanta, I don't think that he has. But like, do they exist? I also don't know. So it's a gamble. But I think like those would be the three main guys that they would go after. Again, the priority would be to shore up the defense. And if they can shore up the defense, which is great, by the way. I mean, JV's been solid. Not elite, but solid. It's just, it's one of those things where I think they look at their playoff matchups and they're like, yeah, when we get to the playoffs, Luka is going to put JV in the 50 pick and rolls.
That's true. That's true. I
And
mean, yeah. I guess I look at how their offense is structured now. And granted, Herb shooting the ball well, that makes everything look a lot better. I just think that though, like I like Onyeka the best out of the guys you listed, but I like him as a backup. I don't think there's a ready replacement out there for Valanciunas, and what Valanciunas gives you on offense when he's playing well, even if in the playoffs that's 20 to 25 minutes a night. I just uprooting that for an uncertain replacement, I would be very hesitant to do right now. And I think that ultimately they will be hesitant to do it because this is how NBA teams, particularly smaller market teams, operate. Is the Pels can say this group has never gotten a chance to play in the playoffs together because Zion was hurt when they were in the playoffs against the Suns. They can say, we have never ever put this group together in a playoff setting, and they've all bought in and they're all playing well. So let's see how they do in the playoffs. I have to imagine that a significant portion of the front office thinks in those terms, or the coaching staff, or
like
both.
they pushed the Suns the way they pushed him when they were starting Jackson Hayes next to JV.
I know, man.
And Zion is not Jackson Hayes, and obviously, like all those other guys that are now part of the rotation have improved, right? Like Herb's a way better player. Like the Trey is a way better player. They have Hawkins. Jose is improved. Najee's improved. Like so there is an element of I think you have to have a little bit of uniqueness to win in the playoffs, and like the Pelicans are unique in that they can pulverize you with their like big man rotation, like with JV and Zion and they, if their coaches adjust the lineups in a more optimal way, they can outshoot you too, right? They have those players.
And if you compare them to the Wolves, who are still, atop the Western Conference, though they, Pels have outplayed them the last 15, like you said it about JV in the matchup against those guys. JV wins that matchup against Town. I mean, he can rack fouls on Towns because for all of Minnesota's talent, I will believe Towns's sort of playoff bona fides when I see them in terms of staying out of foul trouble in tight games and not losing his composure and stuff like that. And if he can stay physical with Gobert and give Gobert problems, like Minnesota in the playoffs is going to have to rely like so much on Anthony Edwards in the clutch shot making. And Ant is a special kid, a real special talent, but I think playoff shot makers and the type of shot maker that Ant is, which is like, let me play an ISO, let me find my matchup, let me purposely slow the game down in the playoffs down the stretch. That type of stuff is hard to win series by over and over and over again. That's why I like the Pels team structure for how they are attacking, and I hope that this style of play carries through to the playoffs, that this is how they use Zion instead of having everything slow down. Let's try to do a spread pick and roll with Zion and get him going downhill. That stuff can work, but it is like brutally simple, and you're asking for everyone else on your team to get tight. There's like going to be very little flow to how those possessions unfold. And I think honestly, you'd be risking Zion, number one, going to the free throw line where his touch is still iffy, and number two, potentially getting banged up and getting hurt. So if you can avoid playing that way, the way that I think the Wolves will have to play with Ant, I would personally, I would embrace that uniqueness, those different looks that you can throw. And I just, I can't wait to see their matchup, man. I can't wait to see it because this like I typically resist that sort of veteran speak where it's like, well, we've never lost to playoffs where everyone's healthy when like there's very clear endemic flaws in your team that you need to improve. But in the Pels case with these kids, like, yeah, let them go. Like, I'm sure that internal expectations, if they get to another first round playoff series, I'm sure they would really like to win it. But given that it's Zion's first year, they probably have a little bit of grace. And I would think that that is okay. You know, this would be Daniel's first exposure to playoff ball. Hawkins is a rookie. Like, they are still, even though they have been relevant for now 3 years since, you know, the Sun series last year when they were the 1 seed in December before Zion got hurt, and now again, they are still very much needing to get their reps in and see what kind of mark they can make. I just I think they could I definitely think they can win a first round series depending on their matchup. And in the second round, if they play Minnesota or they play OKC, if those two teams are among the top seeds in the West, I like their chances. I do.
Yeah. I think like outside of Denver, they're in the Clippers. I think the Clippers right
Clippers are
now,
good. Clippers can switch, which is how you would counteract a lot of the offense that they run. Like you
and
still have to
ironically,
absorb
the Pels
Zion, but yeah.
have actually, I think they prior to this last game that they lost against them, they'd won like something like 10 straight matchups or something absurd, right? Like they was just like they were the Clippers kryptonite. I do think James Harden changes the equation for them,
I would
but
agree. Yeah.
which James Harden is going to show up in the playoffs? I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So it's I think the Clippers are a tough one. The Denver one is scary because they're Denver, but everyone else, like I think the Pels can go toe to toe with, no question,
Yeah.
um, and come out on top, and they would have different ways to beat them. Whereas I don't think everyone else would necessarily have those different ways to beat the Pels. I think it
Yeah.
would come down to like a lot of the similar stuff, and I think it's a terrible. I don't want to say it's a terrible example, but because it's an outlier, but like you look at when the Suns made their run to the finals, all the chatter with them was, yeah, well, Booker's never been to the playoffs. Mikel's never been to the playoffs. Cam's never been to the playoffs. DeAndre's
Aiden
never
too.
been to the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the Pels have a little more experience, not too much more, a little more experience than that. But it's just like, if you're a complete team, things can go well for you. And so I think if it's one of those situations where they can upgrade, I don't think they're seriously going to look to upgrade Larry, because I think they love Larry and they love his leadership muscles on the team, and they value that. But if they could upgrade him into, an Onyeka Okongwu or someone similar, and then maybe they can upgrade one of the guard positions as their backup guards, that's looking pretty interesting, because I do think they don't have guard scoring or guard offense on their bench right now. I mean, I think like Hawkins is scoring, but he's not creating his own shots, right? There's not a lot of creation on the bench from the guard position at the moment. And so, it's funny, I tweeted about it today. Is like, if Chris Paul got traded and happened to get bought out, that would be a tremendous addition on the bench. And I think that would
Sure.
actually complete what they would need. And I would feel good about, we talked about they have a solid 7. I would feel very good about that 8 plus. Then you have a Dyson. Then you have, and Hawkins that could be X factors at any given moment.
Can continue his tour of, joining players that irritated him. Him and Jose joining forces on the bench would be great. But look, man, I have taken up too much of your time. But we have, I think, mostly controlled ourselves in talking about Trey Murphy. You've been on my podcast twice now, and we haven't like all the way had our Trey Murphy celebration. So you think he should be a starter? I obviously think he should be a starter. I want to give you the floor about how good you think he is, how good you think he can be, and sort of what sort of you talk about his lineup impact all the time. Talk about how important he is to this team.
When you have two guys who command the defensive attention they do in Zion Williamson and Brandon Ingram.
Yeah.
To have a 50-40-90 guy, 60-40-90 if you want to split it from like a 2-point percentage, right? Like to have someone who is, his true shooting last year was like around 65. And to end the year, he was scoring like 20 points a game on like 70 true shooting. There is a threshold where the more you increase a player's usage, their efficiency comes down, right?
Yeah, Mikal Bridges this year, sure.
We are nowhere close to figuring out what that threshold is for Trey Murphy. Like, he gets like 10, 11, 12 shots a game, puts up 16, 17 points a game, and it's on 67% true shooting. And you're like, oh, that's really, really good. So what happens when you move 10, 12 shots a game to 15 or 16? Does that 67 drop down to 65? That's still insane, right? And is he scoring 23 points a game on like 65% true shooting? Then what happens if you bring that up to like 17, 18 shots a game, right? I don't think he's ever going to get 18 shots a game. Zion's not getting 18 shots a game, right? But like, could he be a player that on certain nights has the green light to get up 18 shots, right? Like that kind of player, because like now it's egalitarian. No one's doing that. They're all sharing the ball, blah, 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 but I would like to see them explore the frontier of Trey Murphy's efficiency and figure out where the drop off is. And then once they find that drop off, figure out how they can artificially push that drop off further by further optimizing him and putting him in better positions and, banking on internal improvement. That's the first thing. The second thing with him is like, he started to put the ball on the floor more. He was whipping passes off pick and rolls, off left dribbles. Just it's a very like, you mentioned about it. Everyone's going to fall for his pump fake, but it's I'm going to get a paint touch. The defense is coming and I'm going to kick it out. I'm going to make the right read too. Right. So it's, hey, that's evolution. He's seeing the game. He's learning how to process things. I think he still misses some reads, and that's natural for a player that's growing into this kind of role. He's never kind of been in this role before, but it's encouraging. So he's a player who could score 50. I mean, he hasn't scored 50 yet, but he could score 40 points on 11 dribbles, right? He could score 40 points on
the Clay diet, sure.
Dribbles, right? Yeah. Like he doesn't have to dribble. The amount of people in the league who can do that, he could probably count on one hand, right? Now, what happens if he turns into a player who could score 40 points on more than 11 dribbles, right? So it's just like, there's a lot to like about him. I still think like, the ideal version of him and any player on the Pelicans is one that doesn't dribble a lot. Like, I think if they keep the ball moving, keep making quick decisions, playing 0.5 basketball, as you mentioned earlier, that is where he's most deadly. And I think if you play him with a bunch of other shooters, so in this case, it would be CJ and Jordan, the ball is going to fly around. And if you think about it from a pure mathematical standpoint, if you got 3 of those shooters on the floor, the 60% chance ball is going to end up in an elite shooter's hand, right? And if you're a non-shooter, it's actually a 3 and 4 chance the ball is going to end up in a good shooter's hand, right? And if you're Zion Williamson and you got 4 players to pass through,
yeah, sure,
3 of them are elite shooters, like I like those odds, right? So I think there's a lot to be excited about, and I think the thing that's super promising about Trey is that he works tirelessly. I think there are players who, every player in the NBA works, right? Every player in the NBA to reach that level, you have to have a certain level of work ethic. I think Trey is a true psychopath. He's one of those players who is dedicated to his craft. In the summer, he hardly took a day off. He would find gyms in Italy, right? To make sure he was getting his shots up, getting his workouts in. When he got injured and he was going through rehab, he was flying in like, therapists from other states to make sure he was getting extra table work and that kind of stuff to make sure he attacked his rehab in a way that like you would expect a guy like LeBron to do it. You'd expect a guy that's like, that like really invested in his body. You talk to the people around him, that is consistent, like, that's been consistent messaging from them, his teammates and people behind the scenes. It's just been like, this guy is an animal when it comes to improving. And so I will happily bet on outlier level shooters with that kind of work ethic into turning, maybe he never turns into a dribble advantage creator, right? Like maybe he never turns into, like what Brandon Ingram is now, but maybe he never turns into a Paul George, but he's still going to be, I think, one of the most impactful players in the NBA just by the virtue of his efficiency, just by the virtue of his shot making, just by the virtue of his size and versatility. Like I think those things, like the efficiency is going to stay, but like the size is like his defense is only going to get better. I think the rebounding and stuff is going to stabilize as soon as his shots are get more consistent. Like I think right now he doesn't rebound because he feels like he's not going to get the ball and he sprints in transition because that's the only way he gets the ball. I think that's improving, right? So I think those things, a lot of those things tend to fix themselves when you also get a new contract. Like financial stability also brings in a level of, okay, I don't have things to like prove to that level anymore. Now I just got to be like elite, at my craft. And so I'm a huge fan. You're a huge fan.
Yeah.
Let me see the floor to you.
Let me. All right. So for those who, I can't imagine there's those who don't know if you're at this point of the podcast, but Trey came on this podcast because I was very, very big on him in his draft year. And he recognized that. We eventually connected. He was nice enough to come on, which was a great favor to me. But one thing that I noticed right away about him, which you've alluded to, first of all, this was before he popped. This was after his rookie season. So after that series against the Suns, but before last year where he really, really pops. And certainly, now this past summer, everyone talks about his star potential. Trey, this is speculation on my part, but to me, he carries himself like he is a star. And he really believes you give me the touches. If you give me the usage, I can drop 30 on anybody. And maybe not in that advantage creator kind of way where you're going to dip into your bag, but I will find ways to relocate and pump and drive and just space. And Trey's the unique guy who says, well, even if you stick to me, I'll just back up. You want to stick to me from 32 feet? I'll shoot from 32 feet. And he has the very unique ability to make that math work in his favor. The other thing is that Trey's very, very smart, and he knows what parts of the game to like leverage fully, what parts of his game to work on. And he's not going to, like, the Pelicans structure obviously is not one designed to maximize Trey Murphy, if for no other reason that Ingram's there. And Ingram's very good and a good player and valuable to their team. But both those guys are like jumbo kind of skinnier wings. And because of that, you can't really play one of them at the 4. And because of that, you can't play them together with Zion as much as you would like. So this current iteration of the Pels is not designed to maximize Trey, and yet Trey is getting better and better and better and better and better under less than ideal circumstances for him. And I know that our discussion tonight has been about the Pels as a whole and as a unit and where they're going. And if you ask Trey, he would answer honestly that is his concern, is, them winning because they have a chance to be really good and make a lot of noise in this year's playoffs, which is fine. Trey's extension eligible this summer. The class of 2021's coming up. And I'm not reporting anything. I have no intel about this, and I'm not asking you to report anything. But I would personally be a little surprised if he and the Pelicans come to an agreement. There's, I think, room for them too, because Trey's had this knee injury. There's something to getting stability. Trey's also very smart, and if you throw $120 million at him, that's hard to say no to for someone who was at Rice 4 years ago. But I think if he just continues his normal rate of improvement and they don't come to an agreement and he makes it to restricted free agency after year 4, he will get every penny that he will ever ask for from some team. Because everything you're talking about exploring the frontier, like, there are so many teams that are not as like blessed with talent as the Pels are, that will they will start organizing this summer. If there's any whisper that he and the Pels are not going to come to terms, they will start organizing so that they have the space to offer it to
They're
him
organizing now.
Yeah.
Now. They're organizing. So for the exact reasons that you mentioned about like entering restricted free agency and a team throwing a max offer sheet at him, 25% max contract, all the bells and whistles, which include a player option in the final year, 15% trade kicker, upfront payments, all of that to make it, difficult to stomach when it comes to matching. For those exact reasons, I think the Pels do agree to a deal this coming summer. And this is not reporting. This is pure speculation on my part. I think it'll be in the neighborhood of 5 years, 150 million. So the new CBA changed.
Oh, I said 120. I'm sorry, Trey. 150. Okay. Go
120,
ahead.
120. I think,
maybe I was thinking 120, which would be 150. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So same kind of math going on there, right? Like averages out to 30 per.
30 per.
I think with the new CBA, one thing they've done is they've allowed you to extend your rookies at 5 years without making them designated. Previously, that was not the case. You would have to max them out in that case. And so now they could offer them the fifth year, for that rookie extension. And so if the Pels were to do that, they would, I think it would be very wise to. I also think it'd be very wise for Trey to take $150 million. That's 15% of $1 billion. That's a lot of money.
Man.
I think they come to an agreement, and I think it's an enormous number, somewhere between that 120 to 150. I think where it comes down to is personal preference. Do they want a 4-year deal? They being Trey's camp. Do they want a shorter deal in favor of entering free agency a year early, re-upping at a higher rate, that kind of stuff? I think there is, from the player and agent side, there is always an element of how do we maximize our earnings in the limited time you do have in the NBA.
Of course.
And if you're a relatively healthy player, you can probably stand to be a little bit aggressive in terms of entering free agency. OG Anunoby and Clutch, when they signed his deal, it was a 3 3+1, I believe. So it was 3. It was either 2+1 or 3+1. I forget, but he had a player option the final year. Now, Trey's not going to get a player option from the Pelicans. The reason is Brandon Ingram couldn't secure one. Zion Williamson couldn't secure one. CJ couldn't secure one. They have an incredibly strong precedent that they're going to leverage in negotiations. They're going to be like, look, all our best guys don't have one. You are not getting one.
Right.
But that doesn't mean he's not going to get 4 or 5 years of guaranteed money at nearly $30 million a year. Like, I think that's the price tag. They understand it. The Pels very much understand that if we hit, let them hit restricted free agency, Indiana's going to be circling. Detroit's going to be circling. A number of other teams will try to figure out.
Toronto, Sacramento, Golden State, like anyone.
Absolutely.
Like, this
teams
is
will create cap space to make sure that happens. They would try to trigger a sign and trade. They will do all kinds of things, and that is not a territory you want to enter. You want everyone to be happy. You want them to get paid. You don't want that to be a worry hanging over his head for the next year. He's going to get paid.
And that would mean, let's be clear, that if they sign him to that kind of money, his 6th man days are over. The day that the ink is dry on that contract, he is in the starting lineup. Because what are you going to tell him? And like, sign this and then we'll still bring you off the bench. Like, no, that will be certainly part of that negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, I
And
think there's a non-zero chance his 6-man days are over at the in the middle of this year at some point. I think there's a non-zero chance, right? I mean, again, going back to
you
the
and I hope
transaction.
so.
Yeah,
We are the choir and we preach to each other. So yes, I certainly hope so. I will say also that just in comparing it, like Vassell signed for whatever his max was, 5 for 146 for the Spurs before this year. And that was like, well, there's the sticker shock, and then there's everyone saying, no, 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 Devin Vassell's really good. Here are all the reasons why, yada, yada, yada. I'll say that I think Devin Vassell is very good. I like Vassell a lot. He's also gotten nicked up, and he's also 6'5", and Trey is 6'9". And, Klay Thompson, who's Hall of Famer, Trey has not anywhere near Klay's pedigree or his impact yet, but Klay's not the athlete that Trey is. Like the the combination of skills that Trey possesses to me is not like, there are guys, super duper stars, who have kind of what he has plus off the dribble games. We're talking top 10 players in the NBA. But once you get past that and you're just like, what other young player can offer this mix? The answer is just no one. No one. No one shoots as well as he does at his size with his degree of athleticism. And his stuff off the dribble on these catch and drives, he looks so comfortable. And by the way, you mentioned that he misses reads, as anyone would. When if all else fails is, well, I'll just go off at 2 feet and I'll use a 7'1" wingspan and try to yam on someone, and you have the ability to do it, then there's only like, your possession is only going to be so bad. Like, special guy,
there's
man.
no such thing
Special
really
guy.
as a bad shot if he's taking it, right?
Yeah.
There's
I mean,
not.
that's what the numbers say. That's what's been borne out. I mean, and the NBA is such an efficiency obsessed league. Like, he will get that frontier sooner or later. It's just a matter of whether or not it's on New Orleans. And New Orleans, I think, to your point, they know what they have. They know what they need to prioritize. So I
He's
am
firmly untouchable in
right.
in trade negotiations, barring someone like Luka becoming available, right? Like I think when the tier one guys like and
Yeah,
everyone ends up on the
yeah,
table, like I think Zion would be on the table at that point. But you know what I mean? Like,
of course, of
it,
course.
he's untouchable for all intents and purposes. They firmly understand his financial value. Like the Pelicans, when they saw Cam Johnson sign his contract, when they saw Jaden McDaniels sign his contract, and as you mentioned, Devin Vassell, each and every time that number crept higher for one of those wings, the Pels cringed. They're like, man, like that's gonna hurt us. But like they're aware of it, right? And it's one of those things where it's like you also celebrate a guy being good enough to pay too, right? Like the guy's earned the money. You're not trying to deprive him of something he's earned. So
And it's how the Nuggets, I mean, the Nuggets, they paid Jamal Murray and max, and people were quite, Murray had gotten banged up. They hadn't had any success in the playoffs to that point. He'd been in trade rumors. Is this worth it? But Nuggets and Michael Porter, back injury, is he really worth all this money? If they win the title, he gets 40 million a year, all this stuff. But this is what you do as a young team. If you have this talent, if you've acquired this talent and you drafted it, you have to pay it and secure it as best you can, maneuvering within the cap structures that are in the place at the time. And you say, that we're trying to build a champion. This is what it is.
yeah, I mean, like if Trey has a good playoff series, yeah, I mean, but yeah, it's one of those things that I think the Pelicans, if you think about it from a front office side of view, you have to secure this contract before it gets tied to a percentage of the cap. The second it gets tied as a rookie max to 25% of the cap in the 25-26 NBA year, that's when the new TV deal kicks in. The cap is going to be roughly 10% high. It's going to increase by 10% almost every single year, right? He's going to have 8% raises, which is what the incoming team is allowed to give him associated with that. So cap raises should theoretically outpace the team raises at 8%. I mean, they do because cap raises they stack, whereas the team raises are on the base. They don't compound. So if you can avoid attaching it to a percentage of what that cap is going to be, and rather just have it at some percent under and it be a fixed number, and then just do raises on top of that, you have so much more financial flexibility, even if you have to go right up to that 25% number. Like, even if you have to start at 24%, it is just better to lock that in early from a team standpoint than it is to let it get to restricted free agency. Otto Porter got a fun max, right? I think this is what Brian Windhorst calls it, the fun max, right? Otto Porter got a fun max. Andrew Wiggins got a fun max. Like, there's so many players out there that have been wing size players that have gotten maxes. There's just this, like, if you're a front office, don't let them enter restricted free agency.
Yeah, 150 is a bargain. In other words, 150 is a bargain. Yeah,
it's what to expect. I think that is the sticker shock people need to expect this summer.
Okay. Well, Shamit, thank you so much, man. In the No.substack.com, Shamit Dua. Thank you all very much for listening. This has been a blast. Always nice to talk about our future champ Pelicans. That's what I titled the episode last year. It's what I'm going to title it this year because it's
Dude,
what
that
was
I don't know, man. Maybe we changed that up. That was
you think we caused Zion's injury? I hope not. I hope not. It'd be nice to know that I'm that powerful in my little corner here with my little neon sign. But thank you very much for appearing. Thank y'all for listening. This has been Chucking Darts. It's okay to be wrong about sports. Find your dartboard and start chucking. Thank you.